As Shaka descends into greater depravity, he is transformed into war personified, both in his appearance and deeds. When Shaka first emerged as his people's leader, they saw him a beautiful young man with piercing eyes, with a powerful arm, ready to lift up the spear and the shield. His lover saw in him the perfection of manhood. As he becomes more deeply implicated in war violence under Isanusi's guidance, and this is the quotation I have up here, Shaka underwent a frightful change, both in his external appearance and in his inner being, in his very heart, and so did his aims and deeds. He loses the last spark of humanity, following Isanusi's injunction to let your spear be your hoe. Shaka becomes addicted to war, succumbing to compulsive violence. When Shaka is at the zenith of his power and no longer needs to go on the battlefield himself, he lusts for bloodshed and turns against his own people. He longed to see people dying by his own hand. He craved to witness death. Whenever he did not see that spectacle, he became truly sick, and he desired that as his armies were shedding blood in battle, his right arm should remain steeped in gore here at home. This rhetoric of denunciation highlights the similarity between Shaka and characters from more recent works, such as Emmanuel Dongala's Johnny Mad Dog and Nuruddin Farah's Kalusha in Lynx, both of whom come to embody in their grotesque and eccentric physical appearance the transformational power of war. Book covers, we know, are usually chosen by the publisher and don't necessarily reflect, the author's vision. Shaka's first encounter with Isanusi happens while Shaka is wandering in the wilderness. His father has cast him out, depriving him of his position as a successor of the chiefdom, and even of his humanity. A homeless wanderer, we're told in the novel. He's not a human being, but a hare hunted by the hounds. This sojourn in the wilderness sets in motion the third motif I want to identify, the ordeal in the forest, a phrase I borrow from a title of another novel, which is called The Ordeal in the Forest, by Godwin Wachira, which is a novel also about Mau Mau. War fictions often send their protagonists on a sojourn in the wilderness, where, literally lost, they become spiritually unmoored and improvise a changed orientation to war. This usually takes the form of a deepened engagement with war, whereby they are no longer satisfied to let war happen to them, but want a role in its outcome. In Shaka's case, this means deciding that he will do anything to regain his right to the chiefdom and expand his kingdom. From being cast out, Shaka learned that, quote, here on earth, people live by might only and not by right. Suffering a social wrong led him down the path of war. The motif of the ordeal in the forest does not necessarily entail the moral degeneration of the character, but it does invariably constitute a passage through which war's regressive force reveals itself in terms that make it impossible to deny. We can call this a passage to the real, now seen as profoundly other than ordinary life. Thus, a counterexample to Shaka's degeneration is the transformation of the innocent and victimized Laokale, the 16-year-old girl in Dongala's novel, after her terrifying ordeal alone in the forest, whereby she finds the strength and will to defend herself against Johnny, the ruthless 16-year-old child soldier. In the climactic confrontation of the novel, where these two characters who have been kept apart, their stories sort of running separately but parallel in the novel, come together in a Manichaean confrontation, Laokale defends herself against Johnny's brutality, killing him by throwing a book at him. I think, if I remember correctly, it's a Bible. The last motif, the landscape of eternity, can be found in exemplary form in Boris Boubacar Diop's novel of the Rwanda genocide, Murambi, and then read backwards into the earlier text. The landscape of eternity is in some senses a cliché allusion to the allegory of Africa as mother. It recurs in the war fiction with the specific purpose of inspiring healing, by providing a counterweight to the devastation of war. Calling up the image of a pristine landscape that stands outside of history evokes a sense of dignity that seems to transcend the war's destruction. In his novel, Diop evokes a deeper past and an almost mythical landscape to open up a discursive space within which the genocide can be examined objectively. Renewing a sense of one's attachment to place without ethnic overtones is key to Diop's hope for the future. One of the few symbols of the nation left untainted and capable of reclamation after the all-encompassing conflict of the genocide is the landscape. Although the genocide generated an iconography of Rwanda as a landscape littered with the dead and maimed, a sense of Rwanda as place, its particular mountainous landscape, endures and is available to recall as what Diop calls the eternal. In the war fiction that I examine in this study, landscape endures. It repeatedly becomes a symbol of the nation, the blue landscapes of Salima's vision, that can reconnect a devastated population to an idea of the nation that seems to transcend the historical vicissitudes of the moment. If ideas of the nation have always depended on mythical ideas about its antiquity, the landscape fosters a sense of continuity and endows it with particularity. A recognizable landscape is bestowed with a capacity to encompass the people. This mystical relation of landscape to human community can become a source of renewal at a time of despair. Situated in this evocative landscape, safe in its embrace, the writer can propose an examination of the recent history of violence. He can then appeal to reason and purpose in remembering the genocide. So let me conclude. These motifs, the song of my country, the male warrior as war personified, the ordeal in the forest, the eternal landscape, set in motion allegories to break up the deterministic drive to self-destruction brought about by war. Their recurrence helps delineate this literature spanning from the 1960s to the present as a coherent body of work. In this literature, the naturalist aesthetic is deployed to give witness to the suffering of war. Yet this humanitarian sensibility also pushes against naturalism by challenging its determinism and performing through its role as surrogate a task of advocacy. Speaking on behalf of the people and setting in motion a rights narrative in the form of democratic aspirations that grow out of their necessarily revisionist histories. Thank you.